everybody who stepped up. It's not too late to step up. The latest news from Kris and Matt is discouraging in nature. They had the biopsy came back, and the tumor is indeed cancerous in nature. I don't know my cancer terminology, but it belongs to what Kris in that text called the glia family of cancers. They don't know what that means, and they don't know what that says about his prognosis or treatment. They know it's way worse than benign. So that sucks. I don't know. I don't think there's there's any other language to use for that. Kris says she's getting a lot of comfort in discovering how many people love her and how many people are holding her in prayer right now. That makes sense for me. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about that, except we're gonna figure this out together with Kris and with Matt, and yeah, just figure out what comes next. Have I said what I'm supposed to say about that, Kevin?
Yeah, and she texted a bunch of us with the update, and then I texted her back and said, we're all pulling for you, and we're all praying for you at the 8 and the 10 and online. And she wrote back, thank you so much. So we all know what that's like to be held up in prayer. And you can feel the waves of prayer, and it's a tangible thing. So,
thank you, Kevin.
You want to explain about the books?
Oh yes. So the Grace is in a. Do you remember Carmina Burana by Orff? Like there, it starts with there's I don't know what the Wheel of Life. There's this cosmic struggle that is going on, and there's a similar cosmic struggle at Grace between the purgers and the hoarders. There's people whose instinct is to keep stuff, and there's people whose instinct is to get rid of stuff. At the moment, the get rid team is triumphing, and as a consequence, there's books that are available to you. These were hanging out in a cabinet for the entirety of my tenure. I never saw that cabinet open. So I think it's probably time to say farewell to them. There's some great titles in here. So please go home with a book, or go home with 5 books. They are yours to enjoy.
Excellent. And so we also have a sign up over there on the piano for coffee hour. So if you want Kathy's holding it up right back there. So if you want to go ahead and sign up, that would be great, because it. Yeah.
Even if you want to sign up just to bring something with somebody else doing the organizing, that would be great.
Perfect. Excellent.
And I always help you between the 8 and 10 service. So if you have any questions about making coffee or any of those things, I'm right here to help.
Perfect.
But
All
we
right.
need your help.
All right, Avril, let's go ahead and have an update from the outreach committee.
All right, happy to do it. You know, I dreamed about this last night, and I dreamed that you were all booing at me while I was doing this. So, please don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that, no.
I'm right behind you.
Thank you. So I'm on the outreach committee with Kate and Deb Pratt and Kathy Gibson and Sally and Liz and Kevin. And if I left someone out, I'm really sorry. So one of the things that just seemed to be, even before we broke up into a committee, but when we all met downstairs, so many people really want to bring back the Friday night dinner. That was kind of almost an overwhelming request. And there is a group now, Kevin and Marcia, who I left off the list, Liz and Kathy are looking into how to restart that, maybe with a new name. A lot of things are open, but Liz and Kevin did go meet with Kris de la Cruz at Westminster. He's putting out the word there, and hopefully we'll get some interest. And the aim is to get this going after Art Camp in August. So if you want to help with that, I would say talk to Kevin, talk to Liz, talk to Kathy. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. The Companion Parish Committee made a proposal to the vestry for the Borehell Well Project to provide clean water. So we have a group working on that, Judith Macklin, Sally Frazier, Roger Crockett, and Charles McGee. If you're interested in that, those are the people to talk to. Charles is going to meet with a group to assess the proposals and find out how much projects will cost and how we can help. There was some talk about sponsoring a family from Ukraine and other refugees in Myra. I'm told we'll be making some calls to gather information on what's already happening, what needs to be done, and find out how we could help. We talked about the SAC lunch program, which I work on with Sally and Jan, and who else is here that works on that? Oh yeah, thank you. Is Gail here? But no, Gail and Marcia is also working on that. Demetria, they give them away, and then I usually shop and make the lunches. But one of our plans is to make an appeal quarterly for this. So in Lent, Pentecost, Advent, Epiphany, Christmas, really start putting out the word, because we do need more involvement, more food, and we'll be putting a list in the bulletins, but also we'll be passing them out so that people will see what it is we need, what we're looking for. And we have decided that a great way to get the youth involved is to get them to help me again, because we were doing that 3 or 4 times a year before COVID. And so I'll be talking to parents. If there's parents of school-age kids that would like to help with that, talk to me about it. But after Easter, I'll be putting the word out and hopefully get some kids to help me out. There's a book, Randy Woodley. It's about 100 days to get connected to the earth. I know this is something really after Liz's heart, and it would also be a great way to get maybe the older kids, restart a youth group and connect, maybe something for the summer. So that's kind of what's going on in a nutshell there, and you can talk to any of the people that I've mentioned that are on the committee, and of course Kevin and Liz. Thanks so much.
And just so you know, the notes from all of our meetings are on our website. Sue has done a great job of spiffing up our website. So if you ever want to know what happened at our meeting, you could just go on there and find the notes.
Just didn't know that.
You know what, thank you, and I just want to say that Marcia and I attended a meeting recently, the Houseless Collaborative, which is churches and nonprofits working together. And unfortunately, very few churches were at this lunch, and many nonprofits were there. And what we discovered loud and clear is that the nonprofits need a lot of support right now. The people that are working there are doing such hard, good work. So I just want to encourage you, if you have a nonprofit that you love and you think needs some love, talk to us so we can do it together. Because the more we do this work together, the better we're going to be.
And that just reminded me too that we're gonna try to sponsor a luncheon for this group, because they meet and they have one, is it every other month or every month?
So they meet every month, and I did write them, and they're trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great, great group, and I'm just so happy that nonprofits and religious groups in this city are coming together and talking and supporting each other.
And the group is called Together 23?
It's called, well, it has a variety of names, it seems, but Together 23 is what it's going by right now, which I'm wondering what it'll be called in 24, but we shall see. But they're doing great work.
We'll keep you posted if we have a luncheon here. We'll let you know. Okay, Nancy.
Kevin, before we move on to the next agenda item, could I suggest that just to prove that Grace is not the place where your nightmares come true, and in fact quite the opposite, could I suggest that we respond to Avril's report with applause.
Well, I guess the dreams are in the air because I've been dreaming of the chapel. And hopefully you will too in a few days when we get it complete, because we're really getting close to the end. David Waldo and Liz and I did the final wall scrubbing. And then Avril came down and helped me stain the walls, and they no longer have dirt stripes on them.
You guys, it was an unbelievable amount of dirt that came off those walls. I'm still like dumbfounded.
73 years of dirt.
Cleanliness is next to God.
That's right.
The chapel's approaching that now. And we had I think a really decent bid from Neil Kelly to trim out that gap where we took the platform out. The electrician came on Thursday or Friday and put in 2 new outlets, which we're always short of. And we set up the scaffolding, and Dave and Kathleen have those two. I told them they had to stay, but Dave and Kathleen and Jeff Ewing painted on Friday, and half of the chapel is now painted. And I will admit that I had a little bit of a nightmare about the color, because I thought we were doing a light gray blue and it was periwinkle. Anyway, it dried and it toned down, and I actually think it's going to be lovely. So take a peek in there. The painting will finish Monday and Tuesday. The chairs are coming maybe on Tuesday, and the carpenter is coming to finish the trim on Thursday and Friday after camp. So we're almost done.
Try to go in and take a look at the color. It's only half finished, but it really is stunning. It's just beautiful. Okay, Martin, why don't we talk about the NHA update? So do you want me to jump in and you can?
Yeah, well, I can talk a little bit. So Northwest Housing Alternatives is our partner for building affordable housing, a wonderful partner. These days, and I think you've heard this turn of phrase before, we are deep into what is called the street vacation. And unlike your Hawaiian vacation, it's no fun at all. So the street vacation is an effort to get back from the city a 10-foot strip of land on the, what side is that? That would be the
16th.
west, the 16th side of the property. It's a laborious process, and it's a process that, if you wish to impede it, rewards apathy. So when my neighbor wanted to put in an Airbnb, they sent a letter, and they said, if you object, you need to write the city. The letter that went out from NHA to our neighbors said, if you object, do nothing, right? And you have to actively assent to this. You have to send a letter. There was a big article in Atlantic recently about how blue states have a particularly big problem putting the kibosh on affordable housing, because we have all these laws that sound really good about empowering neighborhoods and preventing out-of-control gentrification. They're all excellent in principle, but it means that stuff like this can get sandbagged really easily. With a new governor, with some new energy in city council, it sounds like there may be a recognition that this is an onerous process, and we may be able to get to the far side of it. Interestingly, that news comes just as our neighbors across the street said, yes, we're going to give our approval to the. They just contacted me to say they're going to give our approval to the street vacation. So that is very promising.
So what we're going to do is we're going to write a letter to the city stating all the efforts that we've made toward getting this taken care of. And then we turn that into the city, and then they will say, okay, you can have it back. That's what Destin said would happen. So, yeah.
That is.
That was great.
That's broadly what is going on that front.
Is it possible that some of the other locations along the street have already done this, and that could be pointed out to the city?
Oddly enough, I asked that question. The condos to the south of us never had to deal with it. They never had to deal with it. I don't know about 1620, whether or not
I
they,
think they did.
Okay.
There's a faint memory of that vacation going down 16th further.
okay. And this is something that the city has had for almost 50 years from us.
And that's my question. We know that the city is never going to widen 16th Street.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because they've got exactly one block. that
Correct.
would be available
Yeah.
to widen. And what seems odd to me is that the city can establish a permanent easement on property which they never intend to use and prevent other development from happening on that.
Don't get me started.
Oh, you know, maybe what we need to do is campaign for them to put some kind of a time limit on it.
Yeah.
If you don't do something within, 10 years, then, it has to go back to.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't wanna give them.
Well, no, I mean, from here on out.
Right, that sounds immensely reasonable.
Yeah, but probably more reasonable to.
Perhaps more reasonable than the city.
Irritating to me is that it's really expensive to get your property back. Like to the tune of $30,000.
All right. Well,
We promised you a brief Triduum teaser, looking ahead to the 3 days that conclude Holy Week. Let's start with. That's all right.
I have to go sing a memorial service. That's why I'm all dressed up. It's
That-
not just because I wanted you to see my nice suit,
I just assumed you were dressed up for the State of Grace.
but I did wear purple.
Yes, you did. So a trivia question: when is the one time of year when it's okay to sleep in the middle of a service? Daylight savings time is not a bad answer. The answer is the Triduum. The Triduum is a single service that extends over 3 days. And the assumption is that you go home and have a nap, unless you're planning on being pie-eyed by the Easter Vigil. The assumption is that you're going to go home and sleep. And Holy Week, beginning with Palm and Passion Sunday. That's next week, isn't it? The church had this idea, this sense that to conclude Lent and to take us into the Paschal mystery, the mystery of the Passover, the mystery of Easter, we ought to walk with Jesus into Jerusalem, physically embody, sacramentally embody some of the things that Jesus did and encountered, and then come the Easter Vigil, tell every single story we have, because that is what is going to permit us to understand the Easter mystery. The church, beginning with Paul and Paul's friends, to use the historically correct turn of phrase, began to discern that everything that had happened and everything that was recorded in what they called the Bible led to Jesus and led to the empty tomb, led to the cross before it, led to his ascension. And that's the encounter that we make in the Triduum. You sometimes will hear it heard it said that Jesus he left us a lot of stories, and that he didn't leave us a lot of things to do. And folks will say, well, the things he left us to do were the Lord's Prayer and baptism and the Eucharist. And oddly, folks, when they list these things off, don't add Maundy Thursday. Jesus very much left us a thing to do on Maundy Thursday, proclaiming our service and responsibility to our neighbor through the washing of feet. That's followed by the stripping of the altar, one of the most beautiful and stark and startling rituals in the church year. The next day, the Triduum continues with Good Friday, with this absence of Jesus, and then we're into the mystery of Holy Saturday. Am I throwing this to Dan or Liz? Liz, go for it.
Well, I think my hope is that you will be so intrigued and want to experience this so much that you will come to as much of Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil as you can. I was born Episcopalian, and I did not realize until the last 10 years the importance of these days and how this culmination of Lent and then the Easter Vigil and then Easter Sunday make so much more sense, and it is so meaningful when you can do these things together. I guess there's a couple things that I would just say. Is one, the agape meal on Thursday that we're excited to have is not a Passover meal. So that's sometimes a confusing thing. I would encourage people, if you have Jewish friends, to go and be part of a Passover meal, but this is not that. This is agape meal. This is much more the Christ asking us to celebrate the Eucharist, the body and blood. And Monday is mandatum, which is a mandate to what? Love one another. So can you imagine a more important day? Oh yes. Then there's Good Friday, and Good Friday is actually was called God's Friday for a while. And come and hear my sermon, and you will understand better why it's called Good Friday. It is actually a day of celebration. Without Christ's crucifixion, we would not have Easter, and we would not know him as the Savior. He might have been a prophet, but he would not have been a Savior. So it's a very, as Corbett said last week, it is probably one of the most important days. And then, of course, the Easter Vigil. And we'll light a fire out there. Hopefully we're going to have a nice fire, no puny fire, a nice fire. And then, you know, the deacon, that's me, I'm going to sing. And we are going to sing a celebration of Jesus' coming and his death and his resurrection and the fact that he is our Savior. And then, of course, there's Easter, where we're going to have petting zoo, and eggs, all sorts of stuff. So, I leave it to Dan to probably give more historical information.
You know me so well. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the history of why we do the Triduum, because I think it lights up the meaning of it if you know a little bit of the history behind it. So I'm going to build off of some things that Martin and Liz have just introduced and maybe connect a few dots. And I'm going to do it through the prism of the question of when does Easter begin? Anybody know when Easter actually begins? What's the first moment when we're in Easter? So like Liz grew up in the Episcopal Church, I did not. I probably would have answered that for most of my life when the clock ticks past midnight on Easter Sunday. That is when Easter begins. And now we are in a day and there's going to be chocolate and fake plastic grass in a basket, and that is Easter. So the church has several answers to when Easter begins. None of them are when the clock ticks past midnight. That answer that I grew up with is one of the few that is off the table in terms of when Christians have traditionally pegged the start of Easter to be. So if you go way back in Christian history, Christianity starts out as a variant form of Judaism. And, you know, what we call Easter in the English-speaking world, Easter, we're the minority opinion. For most of the Christian world, the holiday is called Pesach. It's called, you know, it's the Pascha. It is, you know, depending on Greek or Latin, it's Pascha. In Hebrew, it's Pesach. It's Passover. So the connection between Passover and Easter is super transparent for almost the entire Christian world, except those of us who speak English. where the connection is a little hidden behind language. So for the earliest Christians, when does Easter begin? Well, it begins when Passover begins. You calculate when Passover begins, and that's when Easter begins. And that worked for a little while. But then things got a little more complicated. Christians started introducing questions about how there's sort of a complicated lunar calendar by which you calculate when Passover is going to be, and calendars evolved, and there were disagreements, and eventually the Christian world started calculating Easter a little bit differently. If you're curious about that, there is literally a couple of pages in the prayer book which explain the complicated math that is used to calculate when Easter is. So that's one way you could come at this, except then it got more complicated, because in the 4th century, when Christianity suddenly became legal to do in public, Christians started going to Jerusalem, making a pilgrimage to go to Jerusalem. What they found out was that the Christians in Jerusalem, they were used to bringing Easter in stages, not just having it as a one-time thing, that they would actually have days of celebrations leading up to Passover or Pesach or the Christian Easter. And they would have these rituals at different spots in the city that were linked to the events of the Passion narrative. And so as Christians went to Jerusalem and they sort of bought the t-shirt and they went back home and they were like, I've seen how it's done in Jerusalem, they wanted to do it like that in their churches. And so the idea that there ought to be a longer kind of service sort of came in. That there ought to be several services. This is how we start heading towards this Triduum kind of journey. So another way you could come at the question of when does Easter begin is it begins at the beginning of the Triduum, because it's one continuous service that's going to lead us right into Easter. That is a little more complicated as well. So one thing I skipped over here is the notion of the Easter Vigil, which people maybe wonder, why is this on Saturday night and not on Sunday morning? Why did Christians early on make a big point of the night before Easter rather than Easter? And the reason is because of that connection to our Jewish heritage. When does Shabbat begin? If you are Jewish, it begins on the Friday before Saturday because it begins at sundown. And so the early Christians were marking the beginning of Easter on the evening before Easter Sunday, so that was a viable answer for when Easter begins, is it begins when the sun goes down on the day before Easter Sunday. But now you also have these things that were leading into that moment, so where's the moment? And liturgists argued and debated, and eventually they arrived at a sort of answer. And here's the answer. I will give you your birdwatcher's guide for when Easter begins so you can try to spot it when you come to the Triduum. So on Maundy Thursday, we get the commandment of Jesus. We wash feet. We mark the beginning of, the Eucharist, all these wonderful things. Then we get kind of quieter on Good Friday. We put a lot of things away. We remember the crucifixion. The church gets kind of dark and empty for a while. Then we move into Holy Saturday, which traditionally in Christianity is a day in which Christians do very, very little. We sort of remember the Sabbath rest on Holy Saturday, and we sort of rest awaiting the resurrection. If you read actually the collect prayer for Holy Saturday, it actually says, on this day Jesus went to his Holy Sabbath rest. So we're resting on Saturday, and then we get to that evening and we start into the vigil service, but it's still not Easter yet. We start in dark, we kindle a fire outside. We use this fire to sort of symbolize the light of Christ that begins to spread to other people and goes into the darkness in the world. But then there is a moment, and it usually comes right after we have this long section of reading lessons from the Hebrew Bible. This service is all about remembering our roots in Jewish scripture. And all the lessons we read, and you can mix and match them a little bit, although you're not allowed to skip the parting of the Red Sea. That's the one mandatory one. You got to do that one. But if you look at all the lessons that we read from the Hebrew Bible, it's like the Lego kit from which Christians built baptism and Eucharist. So it's got things like the waters of creation. It's got the waters of the flood. It's got the promise of a new covenant. It's got resurrection in the valley of the dry bones. All the symbols that Christians would gather from across the Hebrew Bible and say, this is what Christianity is about. We go through those lessons. And then usually we have baptisms, or we reaffirm our baptismal vows. We get to a moment of saying, here's how all this stuff connects to us as Christians. And then there is a moment. And depending on the church you are in, it is either when you enter the worship space. The Eastern Church, and I understand here, has a lovely tradition of banging on the doors and then opening things and going in. And in some churches, the church is kept dark until this moment, and then the candles are lit and the lights come up. I once went to a church where everybody pulled out their keys at this moment, and they shook their keys, and bells would ring. But that moment is liturgically where Easter begins. It begins at that moment. So if you're keeping your eyes open and watching for Easter's arrival, you can say, that's it. We have now gone from Lent into Easter. So the Triduum is like a service, a long service, that begins in Lent and ends in Easter, and there's a concrete sort of finish line where we step across, and now we're in Easter. So watch for all of that when you come and participate in the Triduum. Two thoughts.
One is, if we let you go
Yes.
at the end of April, it has to be with a commitment to come back and not just as a visitor. Another historical question.
Yeah.
When does the washing of the feet become an established part of Episcopal ritual?
Oh boy, that is a great question. So in Episcopal church history, interestingly, in the 16th century, when we sort of split with the Catholic Church, all the Triduum stuff vanishes. We just sort of put it all away and say, we're going to be very, very Protestant for a while now. And we don't really bring it back until the 20th century. I believe the 1928 BCP was the first to bring back some of these things. So, and even then, in the 1928 BCP, you would certainly have churches that weren't quite ready to make that part of their practice. So really the idea of bringing back, you know, the liturgical foot washing and stuff is kind of a 20th century recapturing of something very, very ancient that we brought back into the tradition. And now it's, you know, it's pretty much universally understood to be important. So did that answer the question, sort of? Yeah.
Yeah, and along those lines, I just would really encourage people to come and participate. Wash each other's feet. It's an amazing process, ceremony.
So, well, Shirley Banks is preaching this year, so I won't have an opportunity to say this. I'll say it now. I recall a colleague or friend saying, you know, I don't know what to think about foot wash. I'm just doing vocal warm-up trips one after another. I don't know what to think about foot washing. It's so awkward. And I thought, oh, exactly. Like, exactly. You have understood something profound about this. This is a weird thing, and particularly in a culture in which we're very reluctant to accept help. We subvert that in this. We get to help another person, and it might be more vulnerable to say, and now help me wash my feet. The one thing, I was saying to Dan just before he came up, the one thing we know with absolute certainty about church history is from the very beginning there has been a petting zoo. So we're keeping that tradition. I think.
Well, and speaking of that, last year, those animals were making these weird sounds, and I'm in church trying to figure out, okay, what's happening here?
Right.
Who's having trouble? No, it was the animals outside. So you're forewarned 2 weeks from today. Those animals might be making some noise.
Right on. I think we've completed our agenda. Liz, are you already
Yeah,
dismissed?
just please give me cards for Kris so that I can take them to her and Matt.
Sign up for coffee hour.
Sign up for coffee hour. It's really fun. And I guess we also need to sign up for that agape meal. And anyone that wants to help is more than welcome. We need some help. Thank you.
Happy Sunday, friends.